Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this talk on karma, on the karma of immobility. And as promised in the last talk, today we're going to take a special look at the 4 dhyanas. For 2 reasons. One is it is part of these teachings, so we should go through it. And secondly, it's something that is often not much talked about, but very, very important in our understanding of the difference between what we call the path of the Shravakas, the Hinayana, and the way of the Bodhisattvas, the Mahayana. Okay, well, let's start. Meditation means keeping the mind where we want it, one-pointedly, in virtue. So shamatha, or concentration meditation, is about holding the mind on one fixed focus, as we heard last time. So there's a whole training, the obstacle removing path, of learning not to be distracted, and a lot of things happen there. But here we're looking at once the mind can be focused and can remain with its object, then what do we do with it? And this is where the difference between the Shravaka path and the Bodhisattva path is to be found. Because on the Shravaka path, we find that once the mind is one-pointedly focused, it can become absorbed in its object. And it's very important to understand what we mean here by that word, its object. And in this case, with the 4 dhyanas, the object means what is called the mental counterpart. The mental counterpart. When the mind is absorbed, there is a very lasting and profound experience of peace. And that peace becomes the very reason for meditating. And once that peace is perfect and never more interrupted, that is the liberation of the mind. It just remains all the time in a perfect peace. In Mahayana, we equally need to learn to keep the mind where we want it, in virtue, in one place, on one focus. But then, rather than that mind becoming internally absorbed, disappearing totally inside what we call the mental counterpart, instead of that, that mind, which is now under control and can be held where we want it, will be used for many tasks related to wisdom development or to compassion development, and also into a different relationship with our emotions and our historical mind. That's a very big topic, and we'll come back to that in other talks when we look more generally at what Mahayana meditation is really doing with our minds. Today we are focusing on these dhyanas. Traditionally in India, and still these days in the Theravada system, the practice is to make an external basis, which is the springboard for the meditation practice. It is called a kasina. And the instructions for making these are quite exact. If you're interested, you'll find them in, for instance, the Vishuddhimagga, translated into English as the path of purification. And there we see that using sticks, one makes a kind of a frame, the sort of frame that artists use to stretch a canvas on, not that large. And one uses strings to hold a piece of cloth tautly in place. And this needs to be done according to the tradition. And then on that canvas, there is a shape, often a circle, of a specific colour, and the colours correspond either to the elements, earth, water, fire, wind, space, or to other things. There's a whole list. For today, that doesn't matter for us. Let's take a yellow, sort of golden ochre circle as one of the classical focuses. So that represents the earth element. And the meditator, having made that, places it just the right distance in front of the eyes, and then learns to concentrate on that in several ways. One way to keep the mind from distracting into thoughts and ideas is to actually keep saying the word earth, 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 while at the same time keeping the gaze constantly focused on the golden circle. Earth, 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 earth. With time, that golden circle and the idea earth, earth, earth has been done so many times that it is really imprinted. You know how it is, for instance, if you've been with somebody, say somebody you really care for a lot, and you go away, even when they're not there, somehow you can close your eyes and see them. Somehow there's some kind of presence. So if we imagine hour upon hour, day after day, one is looking at this golden circle and saying earth, 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 what happens is that the mental counterpart, and what we mean by counterpart is the actual image, that it becomes imprinted in our mind. That image, that mental counterpart, once it is very clear, becomes the real focus of the meditation. So whether the eyes are looking at it or not, whether one is saying earth or not, that counterpart is the focus into which, with time, once the distractions are gone, the mind becomes absorbed. That counterpart is in your mind, it's in your sixth consciousness. It's like the images that can come up in dreams, they are in your mind. So even with the eyes shut, one can hold one's mind on the golden circle of the earth element. And the word earth, earth, is resonating along with it. And at the same time, in order to stay with it, one has become very familiar, one has analysed its colour, the perfect circle, and so on. Now, because that image is in the mind, once one has become so familiar with it, it doesn't depend on the eyes. It's inside you. And this is how the mind, what we call our mind, or our principal consciousness or awareness, can become totally locked in that inner image. We have small examples of this in everyday life. Sometimes when our mind is very absorbed, this is the word, absorbed. In Sanskrit it is samadhi, absorption. When our mind is very absorbed, sometimes we might not even hear the telephone ringing or see somebody coming and going. We're absorbed. So once there is the inner mental counterpart, the mind can become absorbed in that, in all of its qualities. We are shut off from the five senses input. We are in consciousness itself. And that brings not just peace, but an incredible feeling of joy in the body and happiness in the mind, a feeling of great balance. So in the first dhyana, we have 4 qualities. There is the thought, which means really repeating the word earth, earth, earth. One is purposefully thinking earth, earth, earth. There is analysis of the shape and the colour, which helps us stay on the focus. There is physical bliss, because that's what happens once the mind is well absorbed in the mental counterpart. And there is mental well-being, bliss, whichever word we use. And these 2 forms of bliss, when they are described in the Theravada scriptures, are quite ecstatic. It feels like flying, it feels like being lifted so many palm trees high off the ground. Very, very strong inner ecstasy. With time, 2 of those 4 elements are seen to be rather gross. So one is the thinking, the intentional thinking of saying earth, 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 earth. So one can stop that, because now one has a well-established mental counterpart. And also the analysis of the shape and the colour and so on is no longer needed. So in the second of the 4 dhyanas, one continues the process in a much more subtle form of peace, without intentional thinking, without analysis. So there's just the physical well-being and the mental well-being. The peace that emerges with its mental well-being, its mental bliss, is grosser, relatively speaking, than peace which is equanimity. So in the third dhyana, it is the mental well-being, the mind which is blissful, which goes, that might sound a bit of a disappointment to some of you, but when one gets there, it is actually a much more profound joy, if we can use that word, to be in equanimity than to be in an excited mental state. And of course, as you can imagine, we have one more thing to go in the 4th dhyana, which is the physical feeling of bliss and harmony. That also gives way to equanimity. So by the 4th dhyana, there is total absorption and it is total equanimity. Because there's no more thinking or analysis, one can now go beyond form and particular experience. So this leads us into the 4 formless meditations. So the absorption of infinite space, just a feeling of being infinite space, is explored. Again, that is found to be relatively gross, and it gives way to the meditation of infinite consciousness. When that is stabilized, it is found to be relatively gross, and so it gives way to what is called nothing whatsoever. It's the name of the meditation. It feels like nothing at all, nothing whatsoever. But then that gives way in turn to a recognition that although it feels like nothing, something knows it feels like nothing. So it is called neither cognition nor absence of cognition. That was a brief, very brief run-through, simplistic run-through of these 4 dhyana and the 4 formless meditations. As I said in Mahayana and in Tibetan Buddhist meditation, we certainly do need shamatha, and we need to still the mind, to go completely beyond distraction so that our mind can be still, just like that. Whenever we want it, needs to be under our control. We don't need to be puppets of our mind anymore. We need to be able to use our mind as a really beautiful, efficient tool. But rather than going into that internal absorption of the kasinas and following these various depths of peace of absorption, we take a different route. Let me give you one example that may be familiar to you. Many of you will be doing Vajrayana visualizations where, for instance, you have a seed syllable, Hung or Hri for Chinrezig, whatever it is. And one holds the mind one pointedly on that. It's the same as the kasina. If one does the meditation well, that Hri becomes so vivid in one's mind, and the mind can switch to it instantly. But instead of just becoming absorbed in that totally and going through the various levels of bliss and then equanimity, one develops one's mind in offerings to all the Buddhas, respect to all those who are more advanced, and in compassion to all sentient beings, and so on and so on. So there are 2 routes. Both of them start by taking us to one-pointed, excellent meditation. The Shravaka route then goes into the image and disappears into that, whereas the Mahayana route uses the one-pointed meditation to cultivate knowledge of mind itself, to cultivate the 2 key qualities of devotion and compassion, and many other things. So they're the 2 roads split. I think that's it for this talk. If we go any further, it gets very, very complicated. We're either looking at all the various Mahayana meditations, or we're looking at shamatha and vipassana in Mahayana and Vajrayana teachings, big topics, or else we're going more into detail of what the Shravakas do, which in itself is a very full, wonderful topic. They master their minds totally. It's a wonderful achievement. Through doing that, they get themselves free forever from all the negativity of their mind, and then thereby through all the karma, harmful karma that can cause, they can get out of suffering, out of samsara forever. It's terrific, no doubt about it, and that's the way they go. As I mentioned in the last talk, as this ability to hold the mind and to let it be more and more absorbed develops, one must cultivate alongside that the wisdom of the 4 great truths: suffering, cause of suffering, freedom, nirvana, and the cause of nirvana, so that the power of shamatha is used for good, and it's used as part of a Buddhist path. Let's return to our key topic. Without that, shamatha just means taking control of your mind through one-pointed concentration that could be used for good or for evil. It's not in itself necessarily a virtuous thing. Thank you very much. I wish you all excellent meditation, meaningful meditation, intelligent meditation. Look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.